Hi everyone, it's Alex from Risk Academy. I recently did an article which went pretty popular, and I called it "Forget About Risk Management, Measure the Likelihood of Success Instead." I mean, this is a pretty cheeky title, but in reality there's a very important message behind it, and this is something that a friend of mine, Norman Marks, has been encouraging for years. The very important message is that to communicate uncertainty to the decision makers, to communicate risks to the decision makers, we actually do not have to use the word risk at all. I mean, we literally don't have to even mention the word risk, because there's a much better way to communicate uncertainty to the decision makers by showing how that uncertainty impacts or affects their decisions or their budgets or their proposals or their strategies. So the example I used in the article is actually pretty simple, which I actually did many years ago, and it worked just amazingly. I mean, it has such a dramatic effect on the strategic session, or on the whole strategy process, that I've been using it ever since. But the idea is very simple. If we're talking about success for the company, for most organizations, that success is actually measured in terms of achieving some sort of KPIs. And we can actually use the tools that we've had for the last 70 years. We can do scenarios, or we can run a simulation, and we can actually measure how much uncertainty will affect those strategic KPIs or objectives. We can actually measure how likely those strategic KPIs are to be achieved. Or let me rephrase that. What are the chances of meeting the strategic KPI? I mean, we can actually measure that. I mean, and that's absolutely, I find this absolutely amazing. We can look at any KPI in any type of organization, government, private, financial, non-financial, actually doesn't matter. We can look at literally any KPI on the planet for any organization, any type of organization, and we can apply risk management techniques to give a definitive answer of how likely that KPI is being achieved. I mean, with 95% confidence interval, obviously, because that's how we always communicate. I mean, there's never 100% certainty in anything we do in our risk analysis, but we can give a very, a pretty good forecast on how likely this objective is being achieved, and that usually changes the conversation quite dramatically, because the typical strategic planning process actually has a lot of optimism bias in it, and the common approach to developing strategy and the common approach to calculating KPIs actually does not properly account for uncertainty most of the time. I mean, unless your strategic department is somehow special and amazing, the chances are they have forgotten that part of the equation which is called uncertainty, and that uncertainty was just never taken into account when setting up the KPIs, which basically means many KPIs may be overly optimistic, unachievable, or difficult to achieve, and so using risk management techniques is a very interesting and useful way to determine how likely that KPI is being achieved. Now, what I've just said, I hope you immediately realize that once the KPI has been set, formalized, approved, and communicated to everyone in the organization, and then you, the risk manager, coming in and doing the calculation, saying, well, actually there's like a 5% chance that this KPI will be achieved because it's so optimistic. We should have never said it that way. I mean, that's not going to play well. And that is exactly why we've been saying this for years. Risk management is not an afterthought. Risk management is not a once a quarter or once a year exercise that you do after the fact. Risk management is a decision-making tool, because you actually run that risk analysis on the KPIs before you approve the KPIs. When you first get the first draft of the budget or the strategy, and at that stage, you communicate to the CFO and to the strategy department and to everyone else in the organization. And that unrealistic KPI does not have to be set in the first place. So, I mean, this is what we've been doing for years. We've actually been helping or working together at the strategic strategic planning process, trying to recalculate the KPIs at the early draft stages, so whatever goes into the final strategy actually has a pretty good chance of being achieved based on our risk analysis. So I mean, my funniest example I remember from my career was when the first draft that we've done the risk analysis on, the chances of being achieved were less than 1%. And obviously that never went anywhere. As in, we discussed it at the executive meeting, and they never approved that version of the strategy. Obviously, so the final version, a couple of versions later, we've done the recalculation a few times. A couple of versions later, the chances of achieving the same KPI, because they've changed their assumptions, they've reshaped the strategy, they've reallocated resources, the chances of achieving that KPI was 70%, and that's what they ended up going with. Still 30% chance of not being achieved. I mean, that takes a lot of balls to communicate that to the shareholders, saying we've done the analysis, it's a risky business, there are risks, and we still accept 30% of our uncertainty that KPI will not be achieved. So I found this fascinating. I hope more companies take on that practice of doing proper simulation or scenario risk analysis before setting the strategy, because you can avoid all sorts of problems if you set the strategies based on the risk analysis. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. Do share underneath this video. For now, thank you and goodbye.